Welcome to another edition of Pro Physio Biweekly. This week we're going to talk about the foot and demystifying the foot. So our feet are so important. They support our whole bodies through our entire lives. We've got 26 bones in our feet, 30 joints, and more than 100 muscles, ligaments, and tendons. It's wild how much we expect from our feet. So they're really quite complicated, but also very simple at the same time. It's really the foundation of everything we do, and it's a bit intimidating as a physiotherapist when somebody's coming in and asking about the biomechanics of the feet or they've got foot pain, because it's really very foundational, but there's so much. 30 bones, 100 muscles and ligaments and tendons. Like, how do you kind of filter through all of that stuff and understand how what's going on down at the bottom at the ground is affecting the rest of the body? Because it really does affect the entire body. And if you have foot pain, it is very debilitating. You cannot walk, you can't do your exercises. Life is tough. So let's just break it down a little bit, and we can look at a few models at some point. I'm going to show you some shoes so we can talk a little bit about what the right type of footwear is for different foot types and different types of running and who should be in what kind of shoes. Because I know my patients always ask me, what kind of footwear should I use? What shoe should I buy? What's the right shoe for me? So if we think about the foot, our foot is made up of a ton of bones, ton of ligaments, ton of muscles. So every time you take a step, your body, your foot has to accept that ground, and it has to adapt its positioning so that it can spread out on the ground and have a stable base to work with. And then it has to become very, very strong so it can push off and take your whole body and propel it forward. There's a ton of things that can go wrong with that. So if we think about just natural and basic foot things, we've got sort of three basic types of a foot. So we've got our sort of a neutral foot where we've got a nice normal arch and you're walking in the sand and you have that lovely, lovely silhouette in the sand. We've got the heel around the side of the foot and the forefoot. Then we've also got our pes planus, or our very flat feet. So those are the feet that really spread out, and when we're walking on wet ground or in the sand, it looks like a duck's foot almost. So you don't see any elevation of the arch, it's just the full foot. Then we have on the opposite spectrum our pes cavus foot, and we've all seen these feet where the arch is very, very high and you're really just having a couple of points of contact when you're walking. So it's really just the heel and the ball of the foot and maybe a bit of the toes that are contacting the ground. So you can see how the difference in the foot contact is going to affect a lot of things. So your flat foot, the whole foot's contacting. Your high arch, only a couple of points are contacting. So if we kind of break down those different foot types a little bit more, very basically, when you have a very flat foot, if you grab those joints in the foot and you wiggle them around, you're going to find that that flat foot is a very flexible, malleable foot. So it really moves a lot. Those midfoot and forefoot joints are really quite flexible. They don't support things very well at all. So these are the patients that will come in quite often, and they'll have issues with either plantar fasciitis or Achilles problem. Sometimes their knees will be painful, maybe they're having hip problems, and they often will say, my feet just ache all the time. And when you look at it, you can see that the foot is really, really flat and there's just not a lot of natural ligamentous support. So those are the patients that really benefit well from having a little bit more support built into their shoes or their footwear. And we'll talk a little bit more in a minute about orthotics and who may benefit more from orthotics. So, and then we'll take it to the other end of the spectrum. We'll talk a little bit again about those high arch, those pes cavus feet. Now, if you do the same thing with the pes cavus foot, where you try and move those midfoot joints and those forefoot joints, you're going to find that they don't move very much at all. The pes cavus foot is really a rigid foot, so it's not very adaptable to the ground. It doesn't flex very much. So if you think about that sort of a scenario when you have a very rigid foot that you're pushing off of, chances are you don't want to add a lot more rigidity to it. You want to find a way to make it almost a little bit more flexible so it can accept the ground a little bit more and be a little bit moldable into the ground. So those are the feet that you probably don't want to put into a very rigid orthotic. You might want to add a little bit more cushioning or a little bit more strengthening in other areas too, or get a little bit more muscle work and maybe not so much relying just on the intrinsic stability of that foot. So when we talk about orthotics, which obviously we have to talk about anytime we talk about feet, because this is one of the primary questions that our patients are going to come with us. I've got a sore foot. How can you help me? Do I need orthotics? My doctor said orthotics, and we think, oh my God, I don't know, this is a huge question. First of all, I don't think that everybody needs an orthotic. Orthotics are very appropriate for a lot of things, and the cases that we're looking at when an orthotic is appropriate would be a case where you do have a foot that does tend to be that bit more flexible foot that needs a little bit of extra stability. So we can have a custom-made orthotic done, and we can do this at all of our clinics. And the beautiful thing is, if we're doing this at our clinics with our chiropractors or the physios, then we really have that ability to give some input and to talk about what the issues are. So people with a flat foot, they do need a little bit more stability. So that will help a lot with foot pain and also with the knee pain and hip pain as it's going through the kinetic chain. Now on the opposite spectrum, I sort of mentioned that, again, go back to that high arched foot where we don't want to add a ton of stability, but people with high arched feet do still have a lot of foot problems. So they are very prone to Achilles tendonitis and plantar fasciitis, and also a lot of metatarsal problems in the forefoot because there's so much pressure going through that forefoot in the metatarsal region. So we don't necessarily want to put them into an orthotic to limit the amount of movement or to add more stability, but we may need to put them into an orthotic to help cope with an injury. So when you're dealing with that plantar fasciitis in particular, which is really common with the pes cavus foot, that custom orthotic where the arch is really fitted to that person is going to prevent that arch from splaying and from pulling constantly and really help with a lot of pain control. Likewise, these are the individuals that often benefit from a lot of mid-foot support, so maybe having metatarsal pads added in there so that you're lifting up the heads of the metatarsals that sometimes are making a lot of contact with the ground. So that's just a little bit about orthotics. Now, we do see a lot of athletes in our practice, which is great, and a lot of runners. And as I mentioned before, I have a lot of people saying to me, oh my God, what shoes should I go into? There's so many different running shoes. What's a good brand? What's a good style? So we can kind of break it down very basically. If we're talking about running shoes and general sneakers or walking shoes, there's 3 basic levels of footwear when we're talking about exercise shoes. So we've got your most basic, which is just that neutral cushion shoe. It does not offer your foot a whole lot of support. It's very flexible. I've got some shoes here just to show you a little bit of an. So here we have a very, very basic running shoe. This is a well-loved, well-worn shoe. So our most basic shoe is a neutral cushion shoe. So like I said, it doesn't offer a whole lot of support. So when you're looking at a neutral cushion shoe, you're going to take someone who's got a pretty normal foot. They're going to be okay in a neutral cushion shoe. Now this one has very, very little support. So you can see the toes bend, we turn it sideways, it just moves. There's not a whole lot of support. We look at the back, we can just move it around. This well-loved, well-used shoe. You know, I would have brought new ones, but we can't afford them. We have a very low budget for this program, so I had to rob my closet and my daughter's closet. So this is the type of shoe that, you know, a lot of teens, I will say, like for their running shoes because they're relatively fashionable and they don't look clunky and awful. But if you've got any foot biomechanic issues, this is not a good shoe to be running in, okay? It's just a little bit too neutral. So you can also, there's other levels of that neutral cushion shoe. So this one you probably don't want to be running in. It's okay to walk around in. We bring it up next to the next level, which again is a very well-loved and well-used shoe. So this is also a neutral cushion shoe. So the cushioning is really beefed up in this guy. So this would be an ideal shoe for somebody who maybe does have that pes cavus high arched foot and maybe a very rigid foot, and they're not prone to go into pronation and needing a lot more stability. So we can see, so there's going to be a little bit of give side to side this way. You can see the beefiness of that cushioning. It bends nicely this way and it does go side to side a little bit, okay? So there's a nice little neutral cushion shoe. This is gonna give people a lot of really good comfortable miles. If you're a nice, efficient runner and you're putting in a lot of miles, maybe you're doing 10Ks, half marathons, something like this is pretty decent. So then if we sort of move into people who maybe have more of a neutral or a slightly pronated foot, so now we're moving away from those really high arch people where they have a lot of natural rigidity. The next level of shoe is basically a stability shoe. So a stability shoe will give you a little bit of support, not a ton of support, it still moves nicely. It's gonna have good cushioning, okay? So you can see the cushioning, there's air cushions in here. We look at the heel counter, it doesn't move back and forth. So if you're someone who tends to pronate, then it's not going to break down. The shoe's gonna be able to hold a little bit of that pronation, but if you're a heavy pronator, you're gonna break right through it. There should be a little bit of bend forward, but not a whole lot of that side to side twisting, okay? So that's sort of the difference between that neutral cushion shoe versus the stability shoe. The stability shoe adds that pronation control, but it's still fairly flexible. Now we move up, then they get a little bit beefier. So then for those individuals who really pronate a lot and their feet are quite flat and they need a lot of extra stability, we're gonna go into like a real motion control shoe. Now this is actually a trail running shoe, because this is the only motion control shoe we have in our house, mostly because we all have pretty normal feet. But when you're dealing with a motion control shoe, it's gonna be very, very firm. So you'll see there's some cushioning, but when you try to do that side to side motion, it really doesn't want to move. It's stiffer all the way through. It's got a much firmer last that's built into it. So this is not going to allow anyone. It's going to be really hard to fall into pronation on this shoe. So it gives you a whole lot more support. So a lot of runners, when they go out, they go to the shoe store and they say, oh, I want the most supportive shoe. I don't want to hurt myself. But keep in mind when your patients are asking you what kind of shoe, they may not all be appropriate for a motion control or stability shoe. Some of them will need different types. So I don't think it's really our role to recommend specific shoe styles or brands or models, but I think we have a lot to offer our patients as far as recommending that they go into a shoe store and they ask for either a neutral cushion shoe, a stability shoe, or a motion control shoe. Thank you so much for watching our video. Make sure you like it, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and share it so that we can grow and maybe we can afford to actually buy some new shoes.